a little devotional. So this is part 4 of this series, and that's from last week. That's right, and that's not this week's. And this will be, thanks for coming, Guy. I emailed Will. Did you all, how many of you all came last week? I did. It was superb. To those of you that who on Zoom who did not attend last week, it was recorded. Please view it again, and there are 4 handouts left over here. If you all did not take one, please do, because it's very helpful. So this, I've got more material than I have time, which is typical. And I want to engage us in a discussion. And this will be the most secular, okay, and fact-oriented thing. This is probably more conducive to a Wednesday night than a Sunday school class. But this information is what people want to talk about, so we're going to talk about it. And primarily is that even though on session 2, we started to get into actions that we should take, we're going to develop that a little bit more. And then probably about the most important thing is, you know, what stands in our way of being able to do that. And thank you. That handout is actually from last week from Will Wellman's presentation. I don't know if you all saw it. It was superb. It was just wonderful. And I thanked him for it. So if you look at actions that we can take them as by ourselves and with our families. We can do them within our church. And we can do them with others who are outside of it in, you know, regular secular society. So let's look at this first. And one of the most important overriding themes that affects all 3 of them, including our own behavior, both in the home and as individuals, is that it is essential that we electrify our use of energy. So that means that everything that you do to move around, that you use in your home to heat it, to prepare meals, to distribute it, to wash it, the power to generate that, the energy we use is from electricity. Because the other key to this, that I'll get to that in a minute, is we need to electrify the grid and expand it so that it becomes readily accessible. And that primarily a renewable and non-carbon generating energy for production of the electricity is what we're doing. So as an individual and as what we do in our home, we ought to know the relative proportions of what it is or where our energy comes from and what we use that energy for to generate carbon emissions. And so this pie graph shows that to us. How we move around is about 30%. Home heating is about 20%. Other energy use, which includes, I think he used the word vampire. Okay, I actually think he meant the word zombie, but you get the idea. It sucks energy, okay? And that's leaving your TV on and your computer on and all these other smart devices. Food is another big portion of that. And the stuff you buy is also almost as much as moving us around. Okay, and that's because carbon is embedded in virtually everything that you purchase. So now, if you total up what we have from the way we move around, what we eat, and what we use to heat and cool our homes, it's about 60% of this. And this is the one that we can really directly affect, even though the others require our participation in society's change in the way that it generates energy. And I'm going to talk about how we move around. And notice that as a proportion, and why we move around is important, is because the amount of carbon footprint due from the cars that we drive is about 40% of all the US greenhouse gas emissions. And almost 10% of that is related to the trips we take on an airplane. So two things, how we drive around and how we fly around or move from Nashville to go visit our children, to go visit our grandchildren, I should say, to go take a vacation. If we choose to go to Europe, yeah, okay. So, but you get the idea. So yes. Correct. That's under stuff you buy. Okay, so this pie graph, yes, yes, Guy. It's under stuff you buy. I'm sorry. Yes, got it. The question was, in this pie graph, is this transportation of what we do, okay, as an individual and as a family? And the answer is yes. How we get stuff to us, delivered to Target or to our door through Amazon Prime, is stuff you buy. Okay, so, and again, it's three areas that we talked about, and why we move around is important because we are a large part as a collective group for emissions because of the cars we drive around, the airplanes that we fly in. So if we're going to affect that, drive the most efficient car you can. Buy an EV if you wish. Now we can get into the relative economics of that or whether there's a better way to go about it. I personally drive a car that gets about 31 to 32 miles to the gallon driving around town. Gets about 43 or 44 if I'm driving on the interstate. I can't see that my own individual carbon footprint would be greatly enhanced by buying an EV. And also given the fact that TVA's power mix is only 60% renewable and carbon free. Actually, that's pretty darn good if you look at utilities as a whole, or that pat them on the back or whatever. If you come to church, don't do what I did, which was to get into my car. I could have walked here or rode my bike. Unfortunately, I would have had to get out of bed a half an hour earlier than that, but that's okay. And one heuristic that I'd like you to try and keep in mind, and by that I mean something easy to remember, is if I choose to get on an airplane, how much damage am I don't want to use the word damage, but what is the effect of that? And if you take off and land a 737 and you're a passenger on that plane and you divide up that carbon footprint amongst all of you, it's about 1/10 of a ton. That's 200 pounds, okay? And if you fly 500 miles, and this is a one-way trip, so that takeoff and landing is one way. It's not a round trip. You fly 500 miles, it's another 1/10 of a ton. So you can kind of get an idea of what it is. Now it's a 737. If it's a 757, it's different, but these are pretty good numbers to try and keep in mind. The reason for that is that there's really no way that we have a way of affecting that other than planting a tree. Now, there are other ways, perhaps you can invest in companies that try to capture that or whatever. But once that carbon is out in the atmosphere, we can't do anything about it. And if we've chosen to take an airplane, well, you can't make jet fuel A in a non-carbon free environment anymore. Unless you do, you could, but it's frightfully expensive. So if you take an airplane ride, I suggest you offset it in some fashion, and we'll talk about how to do that. Now, you asked, Ken asked, not Andy, but at any rate, you asked about life cycle emissions in an EV. In this graph to the right at the bottom, given the current energy mix of renewable energy in the US power grid, shows that the relative difference right now in terms of emissions over the life cycle of the car, which is a big word, which means everything from making it to getting rid of it and then using it. Okay, that's what is, how much carbon is released when we make it, how much carbon do we release when we use it, how much carbon do we release when we get rid of it. shows that the relative proportion of buying an EV in the United States to buying a regular internal combustion vehicle of the same size is about 55 to 40. Okay. So that says maybe we're not doing so much. The point, however, is that if we electrify the grid and you look at the circles just above the large circles at the bottom, the relative ratio about fuel savings is 26 to 13. So that number or that ratio would drop to 13 to 55 if the brass proportion of your vehicular energy came from renewable energy. Other things you can do is that if you have a refrigerator in your garage, I've got one. Sorry, I haven't gotten rid of it yet, though it is Energy Star efficient. It is the most efficient model that I could purchase at the time. Get rid of it if you can. Would require you to go to the food store more often. Both TVA and Piedmont Gas have programs that offset this. You can purchase them. And Guy, I know you love to cook with gas, right? You're not going to use the coil things ever again, are you? Okay, you can for $50, $70, try this out. I don't want to put you on the spot. No, but you can buy an induction cooktop. Okay, it requires you to have ferrous pans. I'm sure you do. You know, you have iron stuff. Okay, try it out. See if it's as good as gas. The reason for that is there are a number of commercial kitchens that are shifting to this particular technology. So if your gas grill, not grill, but if your gas cooktop fails, try this out, okay? There are other things you can do with regard to putting in a programmable thermostat. Probably the most efficient thing that you can do is if it's accessible and you don't have R30 or above yet here in Middle Tennessee. I can't get it in one part of my house because there's not enough attic space. But at any rate, added a layer of insulation. And oh, by the way, at this particular point in time, you can get a 30% tax credit. I want to emphasize that. So that 30% of the cost of doing this will be rebated to you by the federal government. Let's go on to, there's any questions about energy in our home and how we move around? Okay, well then I want to talk about what we eat. And if you look at the average diet in the United States, dairy and meat consumption and production produces the largest percentage of greenhouse gas emissions in the food chain that we currently have, with beverages, seafood, et cetera, being by far in the minority of it. So meats and dairy are about 75% in the typical food production and consumption in the United States of the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the food we eat. And this graph also summarizes that and also gives a summary of what the effect of cutting beef, okay, not dairy, but just beef alone would be in our diet. So the upper left-hand graph shows us that the amount of carbon dioxide produced by our eating beef and lamb is multiples of what it would be if we considered consuming chicken and fish and pork. Yes, Ken? That's exactly the reason. Yeah. The second thing that they produce is cow patties. And those cow patties, being relatively large, release nitrous oxide and nitric oxides into the atmosphere. They are greenhouse gases as well and far more potent than carbon dioxide. And the action of the bacteria in an anaerobic fashion on a large amount of that, it also produces methane. So it's two things, but you're right, by far that is what comes out of the other end of the cow, which is the ruminants. It's essentially well, for the biologists of you here in the group, is essentially anaerobic metabolism, which produces methane. Okay, I'm not going to get into that, but at any rate, it's primarily what they belch. So there's some innovative farmer, both dairy and cattle in England, and this guy came up with a mask to capture that. Now I don't know how it's going to affect the behavior of the cattle. One good thing is that there are additives you can add to their feed that some people are testing to decide whether or not cows like it or not, that will reduce the amount of methane that they produce. Now, I don't know how much it's being tested. I got a friend of mine, my former roommate in college, owns a farm in Dixon, has about 35 cattle. I've told Ron, hey, Ron, how about you, why don't you tie into one of these companies and maybe you could test this to see whether or not your cattle get as big or something like that. So, but at any rate, the point of this is that on average, we could cut 1.5 tons out of an average of 15 tons per person of carbon dioxide just for not eating beef. So that's a pretty significant thing. And then finally, the last thing I want to do before we go on to talk about what we should do as a congregation is buy less stuff. Look at this, that a large proportion, second largest proportion, as I showed you on the previous pie-shaped graph of consumption, is the stuff we buy. I want to speak against fast fashion. I got to talk to Mary. I won't get into that. But basically, if you're going to buy some clothing, I please ask you that you intend to hold on to it for a long period of time. And the reason is that one excuse at times that I've made until I became a little better educated was, if I bought something, I thought, well, you know, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't look good, I'll just give it to somebody else. Well, giving it to somebody else doesn't work out very well anymore. And the main reason for that is that nobody who used to buy this stuff does it anymore. It's because it's saturated. Ghana, which had, Lynn knows about Ghana because her son was, your son worked, it was there for a while. But at any rate, they've kind of stopped it because they have more used clothing than they can dispose of or do something with. So they've quit taking it, you know? A lot of it lands up in the landfill anyway. So, yeah, Ken. Okay. The answer to that, Ken, is that electrify both of them. Okay, so if I was a shipper and I was concerned about greenhouse gas emissions at this point, given the energy mix in both diesel trucks and diesel rail, I'm sorry, I don't know what the relative CO2 per pound of freight moved is. I do know that diesel trucks have a huge impact on air quality. And that particularly affects the disadvantaged because a lot of them live next to interstates. That doesn't answer your question. But this actually primarily, this graph was meant for Americans in their homes and households and as individuals. Okay, not the question you asked. So it would really be more under the stuff you buy category. Does that answer your question, what this is? So, but to answer your question about the relative advantages of one versus the other, I'm sorry, I just don't know. So, okay. If you want to do more as an individual, I showed these climate carbon dioxide calculators. And then I personally use one tree planted to offset what I do. For example, Mary and I, we make a little over 40 tons of carbon dioxide as the two of us. And so I offset that. And the calculators allow you to look at your, you got to get your bills from NES and Piedmont Gas and just go through the addition. In fact, they'll even do it for you. At least the one here from Berkeley Lab will do it. So yes, Wakil. Okay, I'll answer your second question, which is, do you use, or which of these calculators is best? The second part of that question is I like the Berkeley Lab one, because the answer is they're within about 15% of one another. I did compare all three of these, okay? And it depends upon how much the calculator wants to let you be an average American rather than you as an individual. For example, the Nature Conservancy one has a lot of you as an individual. The EPA one has a little less, and the Berkeley Lab asks you to do more than that. But I think is the balance between getting a very accurate figure by, getting all your power bills and what have you out, and going through what you buy. So the answer, do you understand it's more effort? If you just want to do something within 10 minutes, go do the Nature Conservancy one. If you want to do something that takes a half an hour, which is the one I did, go to the Berkeley Lab one. Okay, they're going to give you an answer within 15%, which is good enough for government work, or it's good enough. I'll just leave it at that. So, any other question? Good. Let's go on and talk about what we can do as a congregation. I'm going to emphasize that we should talk about it, but there are other things we can do. And in part of that, this theme of talking about it was something that we discussed, but I'll get onto that in just a little bit. But what I wanted to talk about is what can we do as a congregation around that theme? And one is to educate ourselves, primarily like this session. Hank, I'm sorry. So you can educate yourselves. We can put things in publications out. Okay. We can encourage home energy audits. And this, when you start changing what we do at worship and the topics of it, then you begin to incorporate people in our congregation who may not feel the same way as you do. So incorporating it into our worship is a good idea, but for Guy, I know that it would be difficult about how you would phrase that, and I'll just leave the situation at that. But if you did it quarterly, we could do something around Earth Day. We could do something around the lectionary in the summer, season creation in September, and then themes around Christmas time. And then finally, we hear it. Yes. Yes, we have done that. We continue to do that. I'm sorry, the question was, and Guy, I'm not doing your suggestion of repeating the question, I'm sorry. But at any rate, the question was, have we been a site for picking up trees to be planted? And the answer is yes. We've done that around Earth Day for the last 2 years. And we'll continue to do that. And you can thank Jill Sink. You all know Jill? Everybody knows Jill. Great. Next time you see her, thank you for promoting the tree pickup thing. Yeah. We try to do the thing in the spring around Earth Day. And the reason for that is that, yes, you want to plant that tree as early as you can. Okay. And we try to do it. Earth Day is the latest that you can purchase a tree and have it survive the summer here in Middle Tennessee. Okay. And you're absolutely right. It ought to be in the fall. The point is that it's imperfect to do it in the spring for the reasons that you just said, but it's better because the tree giving societies are much better organized. Okay, so it's easier to get a supply to give out, and people are motivated in the spring to plant. So so you're dealing with the human factor in what you just pointed out. Does everybody understand that? It's a lot of information. So now what we've done here at Westminster, and I want to point out that we've done a lot of this. We've had an energy audit. The session and prior sessions have done a remarkably good job of creating the things that we should, which is to put LED lights all throughout the building, improving our energy efficiency. We just put in really efficient gas boilers. We plan to replace the chillers outside. These are all things that reduce the cost of running this place and our energy footprint and our CO2 emissions. The other things about recycling, food, et cetera, have less impact. And I say that only because recycling plastics, which has now become something for us to focus on, has little effect upon greenhouse gas emissions, because only about 10% or less of that plastic ends up in another end-use item. Okay, so recycling plastics and our focus on that is not a good way to focus our recycling. However, paper and aluminum are a different story, and metals. Those things do have good bang for your buck with regard to recycling them in terms of both how they get manufactured into another end product and how recycling actually lowers the energy footprint and thus CO2 emissions when recycled material is used. It's kind of a lot to digest there, but paper, cardboard, and metal, a lot of sense. And there's good economic reasons for using them. Plastic recycling is not going to fix that problem. Okay. Don't know about the relative efficiency of glass. And I don't know about you, but there are fewer and fewer things that come in glass. And that gets to the idea of reusing glass. Yeah, I don't want to get it yet, but glass is a good question. The answer is I don't know the answer. So what do we do with others? And I wanted to emphasize that decarbonizing the power sector is what we need to focus our attention on. And how we do that gets to this particular thing. And Alec, if you would, I want to spend a few minutes about how what we do at the policy level is important and what really works with regard to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And I'm going to get to this. That's it. Thank you. And I can just do this. The URL to the link for this simulator is on that slide that I just showed. But this is very, very helpful in terms of deciding what actually works. Okay. It's called En-ROADS, ENROADS. It's manufactured by a group at MIT called Climate Interactive. And if you go to it, you get this. All right. The upper left-hand corner is the current global sources of energy throughout the world. The graph in the middle is the greenhouse gas emissions and their estimated business as usual according to the current governmental policies that are in place. And the very right-hand graph shows what the temperature will be by the year 2100 in terms of increase by degrees Celsius that will occur. Now, to benchmark that degree temperature, The Paris Accords are at 1.5. And the global average temperature this past July reached 1.5. Okay, 1.5 degree increase from the baseline from 1880. If we continue business as usual, we're going to get to 3.3. And I don't know about you, but the disasters or the climate disasters we keep hearing about, you could ask yourself, well, is that just better reporting? Or is that truly represent a significant change in increasing disaster for the people? And in the first, it's the latter. And so I'll just say that. I mean, every week you hear about, Beijing flooding, or you hear about Pakistan, a third of the country's underwater. You hear about more area burned by wildfire in Canada that they've ever had due to drought worsening because, but enough about that. So we're going to get to 3.3. We just had a taste of 1.5, and we're not even on average at 1.5 yet. So looking at this, coming back to before I got on that little diatribe, sources of energy to the left, both in terms of fossil fuels and others, greenhouse emissions and the course that we're on, and notice that it's kind of going to level off finally. And then what the temperature rise would be by the year 2100. Now, down below those graphs, you have ways of trying policies out that will create additional renewables, tax coal, oil, natural gas, improve the energy efficiency of our transportation and buildings, electrify all that we put in our buildings and transport, and then things that we can do about carbon removal, which is plant trees and doing things with regard to agriculture, which is essentially to try and reduce methane production by cattle or whatever. So I'm going to ask you all, one of you all, which one policy do you want to try? Who wants to try one? Okay. What? Okay, let's ban coal. Maybe. Has an effect. We reduced it by 0.2 of a degree. Get rid of all coal in the world, and it does help, doesn't it? 0.2 of a degree is nothing to sneer at. Right? That is a big change. Who wants to try something else? Okay, we're gonna, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ken. The way you're doing it is by taxing it maximally. You put a huge price on it. In other words, you tax the heck out of it is the way the model works. Yeah, and Hank has gotten to the punchline. I'm sorry, he said ban coal. It's do as much as you can to get rid of it. There's always going to be a market for it. There will be a market for it. There'll be a market for it in a completely renewable world, by the way, because there are applications for its use that there's just no other application. I'm sorry, Hank came up with what I'm going to show you here. What? Okay, well, thank you for doing that. But he's actually the punchline I wanted to get to, and we'll just get to that punchline in just a second. Basically, what I wanted to do is that Ken McCarthy was asked. I think it was last week or week before last. Kevin McCarthy. Everybody know him. He's the House Speaker of the House. He said, "Well, Ken, what are you going to do? Kevin, what are you going to do about climate change?" He says, "Well, let's plant 1 trillion trees." Okay. Well, let's just try that out. Okay. Planting trees is a good idea. Oh my gosh. I've planted every tree I can. I'm only down 0.1 of a degree. It ain't going to help at a global scale. Now, I just told you that I personally offset mine that way. Well, it's an example of what you do as an individual about your own carbon footprint is not something that can be scaled up to what we all do. It's just not going to help. What I've done has helped. Planting an additional tree over the course of its lifetime will remove a ton of carbon. You take your average oak tree, and that depends upon where you plant it, what kind of tree it is, seasons of the year. I won't get into that, but the idea is take an average oak tree, white oak that you and I have here in Tennessee, stick it in the ground, water it, and over the course of the lifetime of the tree, it'll take out a ton. Sequester it. Now you can ask yourself what happens to it after it dies. You got to plant another one. Okay. But the reduction of that in a mature forest, that's another thing. But it makes me feel good about myself also, which is important, right? So, yes. Reduce oil by 1/3. Okay. I'm going to make it very highly taxed. Now, it's because our energy supply, if you notice that, is not the one that really matters, which is electricity production, is by coal, and that really matters. Okay. And then Hank's solution, which I'm going to do right now, is let's try a high carbon price. Now, why does this work? Well, because you've worked on both sides of the economic equation here. You want to encourage renewable use. You can do that one of two ways. You can make it easier for people to put renewables in the ground and not try to do something to prevent people's consumption of fossil fuels. Or you can try to prevent people from consuming fossil fuels as the main policy. And this one is much more effective. Why is that? Well, first of all, it improves energy efficiency because you're going to reduce your consumption of energy. Okay, you're just going to reduce it. How many people here have gas heat in their homes? Okay, how many people are considering replacing their gas furnace? When do you think you might replace it? Now, you're more likely to replace it if someone is taxing the carbon in the fuel you're using. Okay, so it encourages your interest in your renewables. But the other thing that you would do is take advantage of the IRA's tax credit of 30% and go put R40 in your roof. Okay, so you'd improve the efficiency. So it works on both sides of the equation, both efficiency and the cost of the fuel. So it's much more effective. And oh, by the way, let's get under the hood here. These little dots on the sliders allow you to get in to what the graph has shown you the cost of it would be. And I said, you said a carbon price. Well, what is that carbon price? Well, right now it's $100. It would be $100 a ton. Now, I just so happened to check the spot price for a carbon credit. This is really getting in the weeds here. But what is the industry in the European Union pay right now to emit a ton of carbon? It just happens to be $100 a ton. No, I don't. I don't know what it is. I have a better idea what the spot price of natural gas is, but I don't know what this. I'm sorry now. Coal already as an energy source for producing electricity is far more expensive for TVA to maintain and purchase than natural gas or renewables. So that's why TVA is eliminating their coal fire plants as fast as they can do it. They'll be gone by 2032. So in the next 10 to 11 years, TVA will have removed all of their coal plants. Yes, I'm sorry. That's a really good point. Suppose we went ahead and we reduced population growth. And we'll go back to here, back to status quo. What effect does that have? And the answer is not as much as you would hope. I'm sorry? Oh, that's what I've just done right here. And I'm going to get rid of this. I went the wrong way on that. I thought you meant by lowest population growth. Okay, if you go to high population growth, it has the opposite effect. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that again. Boosted a couple of tenths of a degree. Now, that's not what people are predicting. This includes population growth at what the modelers thought would be about the rate of population growth. Okay. Okay. I'm kind of done with this. You can go to En-ROADS, easy to remember, Google it, have fun. It's a lot of fun to play with. I mean, I sit there and I've tried to get our congressional delegation to, as I've told you, I work with Citizens Climate Lobby, volunteer with them. I've tried to get the environmental aides in Blackburn, Haggerty's, Ogles is completely lost right now as a representative. He doesn't, I won't get in that. But at any rate, but at any rate, Bill Haggerty's office and Marcia Blackburn's office. Marcia Blackburn's office, actually, we were able to get in there and present this simulator. I've not had success getting into Bill Haggerty's, getting his environmental aide to set up a presentation of this so his staff could become educated with regard to it. And we'll keep working on it. But in fact, I've got all right, so we're going to get out of En-ROADS right now. And we're going to go back to slide presentation, which is there, I think. I'll let Alec fool with this. And I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes. That's good. Thank you. Great. So I'm going to just summarize that a carbon price, you know, the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once. Hank is very clairvoyant. Carbon price is everything everywhere all at once with regard to reducing carbon emissions. And so you can ask yourself, why haven't we done that? And let's just say that there are an enormous number of stakeholders that do not want this to happen. Okay, I'll just leave it at that. You can line up the usual suspects if you wish. You can, but I'll just leave it at that. Okay, we're not going to get into that today because we don't do it. So if we're really going to do something, what are the barriers? Partly it's because the way we behave as human beings and how we process information is extremely important. And what I want to do is I want to skip down to the video that I wanted to produce because I'm running out of time here. And I'm going to let Catherine Cahoe discuss that because over the next 6 minutes. So I'm going to ask Alec to get up here and right. And she does it much more eloquently than I can and in a very shorter period of time. So much shorter period of time.
My elected official isn't on board with climate science. They're saying crazy things like the data is fake or the planet's not even warming. Could you just come and talk to them? If you explain the science clearly, I know they get it, right?
Okay,
When we hear people objecting to the reality of climate change,
can we slow
they
this
often
down?
use sciencey sounding arguments. The data is wrong, they argue, or we don't.
Just too fast. Playback speed, go to. Yeah, go to that. That's fine. That's better. And the next thing is, can you bring up subtitles?
My elected official isn't on board with climate science. They're saying crazy things like the data is fake or the planet's not even warming. Could you just come and talk to them? If you explain the science clearly, I know they'd get it, right? When we hear people objecting to the reality of climate change, they often use sciencey sounding arguments. The data is wrong, they argue, or we don't know enough yet, we need to study it longer. Or they throw out big words like tropopause and trot out claims that the satellite data says it isn't warming in an attempt to buttress their scientific bona fides. If we don't know better, we fall for that smokescreen. But that's what it is, to hide the real reasons those very same people object to addressing climate change. And those real reasons have a lot more to do with identity and ideology than they do with data and facts. That's why the facts are not enough. More information will not convince the hardcore dismissives. In fact, social science shows that if rejecting climate science is related to our core identity, who we see ourselves to be in the world, then arguing over data and facts can actually be counterproductive. People see it as an attack on who they are, saying that they're a bad person even sometimes. And so they respond to that predictably as any of us would if we were personally attacked by digging in and doubling down. I'm a climate scientist. I study the physics that underlies our planet's system. And I know that the very same physics that we use to design airplanes and make our fridges work is what we use in our climate models today. So if we really reject the science of climate change, we have to get rid of our airplanes and our fridges and a lot of other technology that we use every day. And as far as I know, no one has. That'd be silly. So that's why, in my opinion, the greatest advances in our understanding of climate change over the last decade haven't come from the physical sciences. A lot of that stuff we've known for a really long time. The new advances have come from the social sciences, education, communication, even marketing studies that have opened the door on the human mind and how it interacts with information, especially information we don't want to know. Just because we know more about the science doesn't mean we're more likely to agree that climate change is real. In fact, Dan Kahan has showed that the more science we know, the more polarized we tend to be on climate change. And attempting to educate people runs the risk of simply deepening that polarization. Fine-tuning this result, though, it turns out that the type of knowledge matters. More information about the physical science, why climate is changing, for example, doesn't help. But information about how it affects us does seem to sway minds. And it's even better if that information is tied to something that we already care about. Don't start with the science. Instead, start by connecting over a value that you genuinely share with whoever it is that you're talking to. It could be the simple fact that you're both parents, or you live in the same place, or you enjoy the same types of activities, whether it's fishing or hunting or birding or hiking or running or skiing. There's just one caveat. That shared value has got to be something real. We can smell pandering a mile away. I'm not a big hunter, so I wouldn't be the best person, for example, to go talk to a group about how climate change is affecting Texas's quail population. But I do have several colleagues who'd be great at that. So first, identify what you have in common, connect the dots between what both of you already care about and the issue of climate change. As a mom, I'm concerned about climate change because it affects our kids' health and their future. As a person living in West Texas, I worry about the impact of stronger heat waves and droughts, and even floods on our local economy. I'm not a Rotarian, but I am familiar with the group's four-way test. Did you know that climate change fits into it exactly? Is it the truth? Yeah, it sure is. Is it fair to all concerned? Heck no. The poor are being impacted far more than the rich, and that isn't fair. Will it build goodwill to fix it? For sure. And would a clean energy economy be beneficial to all concerned? For all but the fossil fuel companies, yeah, absolutely. I'm not an expert in the economy or national defense, but we have experts like Michael Bloomberg or the Pentagon, and they have a lot to say about how climate change affects businesses and the military. Perhaps the biggest shared value we can bond over, though, often is our faith. More than 80% of people around the world belong to one major religion or another. And there isn't a single one of those that doesn't teach responsibility for the planet and love and care for those less fortunate than us. Social science has taught us one more essential thing. If we present people with a problem or a challenge, even one that has no politicization or controversy associated with it, but we don't offer a solution that people can engage with, we feel disenfranchised, powerless, and our only defense mechanism is to reject or disassociate from the reality of the problem, deny it, or simply not care. That's true whether we're talking about the simple fact that, eating trans fats is bad for us, or discussing how we should be saving more for retirement, or if we're talking about the need to tackle climate change. If we don't offer a solution, it starts to look unsurmountable. And so our brains just refuse to acknowledge that the problem exists. How can we overcome this barrier? By offering practical, viable, and even attractive solutions that whoever we're talking with can get excited about. A concerned homeowner mentioned the amazing benefits of energy conservation and how much you saved. Worried parent, bring up practical steps we can take to make our outdoor play areas safer for kids, even as it's getting hotter in the summers. A national security buff for the military, discuss the benefits of energy independence. Business-minded people talk about the economic benefits of renewables. Here in Texas, for example, per megawatt hour of new electricity, a solar or a wind farm generates 8 times more local jobs than a natural gas power plant. So how can we change people's minds about climate change? Not by bombarding them with more data and facts and science, but by bonding over a value that we truly share, by connecting that value to climate, and most importantly, by inspiring each other to act together to fix this problem.
I'm going to stop right there. And I want to spend the last 5 minutes we have together thinking about 2 questions. Thanks again. And it has to do with this. She emphasized in that video we just saw that talking about it is the most important thing that we can do as an individual and as a group. And she also discussed ways that we do talk about it, which is to find common bonds. Well, here in this congregation, we have a common bond, don't we? We have common belief. You know, we've talked about how our faith discusses, and we spend it at length about care for the planet. So I want you to think about these two things as we go forward here. First of all, I'm of the impression, and I hope the rest of you agree, I'm talking to the choir here about this. It's important for us to talk about in the church. Okay, we need to do this. I want you to think about ways it could be done. And then one of the things she discusses is, and she didn't really get into that, about why we as individuals don't feel comfortable doing it. We didn't quite get that far, and I'm sorry, but it was something that I wanted to talk about. We're out of time, so for another day. And then I want you to also do one other thing, which is, can you think of one thing that you'll do in the next week that hopefully you can continue to do? It could be just, I relate. I told you the story about the cab driver in Providence. Do y'all remember that? We landed in Providence because he missed my dog. And I was on the stick of what she said. Well, just engage people in conversation about climate change. So I got in the cab, and the guy, we were talking about the leaves on the trees. I said, man, these are really on still. He says, yeah, it's been really, really late this year. It was late last year. I said, well, you know, it's amazing how the climate's changing. You know, it could be that. And the guy goes, no, that's holy hooey. That's a bunch of beat, you know. He didn't use that word, but you get the idea. And then I told you about feeling the rib, the elbow in my rib, you know, from you know who. It's, what are you doing? So, but think of an action you can take. You know, Ken's already told me he's going to investigate solar panels on his house. Way to go. So that's something you can do. What we can do as a congregation. And I do want to also say one last thing, that have y'all familiar with the expression, everything I ever needed to know, I learned in kindergarten? Or everything I ever needed to know, I got from a little golden book? That's another one. I actually have a copy of that book. It's great. So sort of thing. Well, then perhaps maybe all we really needed to know was in church school. And this comes from the hymn we used to sing in church school. Cecil Alexander was actually the one that penned the poem. I don't know who put she may have, I don't think she wrote the music to it. I don't know where the music comes from, but all things bright and beautiful, creatures great and small, all things wise and wonderful, 'twas God that made them all. So, you know, it inspires us to take the adage that we have a responsibility for doing something about this. So, any other comments? So that was the devotional to end our session here. So, well, thank you all for coming, and perhaps we'll have a further conversation about that. Thank you all. Appreciate it. So, oh, a shout out and thank Alec. Is Alex still here? If y'all run into him, say thank you for being the IT guy. It would have been, transitions would have been done with a great less alacrity than and then if he hadn't been around, it would have been a disaster. So thank him for doing it. I certainly will. All right. Well, guys, thanks again. And